The first time I was ever catcalled, I was 7 years old, walking through a crowded fabric market in Bangladesh. I remember my mom quickly pulling me towards her and me darting my eyes away, but not before I saw the boy who felt the need to call out something that I didn't even know the meaning of at the time. By the time I turned 10, I started getting told to cover up whenever male relatives came over. And in high school, rape culture manifested itself in the form of house parties, where it seemed like the rules of consent had become optional. More young girls now than ever are being conditioned for a constant search of romantic partners. They're being told to focus on physicalities instead of growing themselves and their passions. With the hypersexualization of women today, our world is facing an epidemic of systematic misogyny. Centuries-old patriarchal society has gone on to perpetuate an environment that breeds abusive behaviors and discourages honest conversations. This climate of discrimination then only allows anger, greed, and lust as the true manly emotions, evoking significant violence, both internal and external. Men today often follow in the footsteps of excused abusers, and the culture is emblematic of that. We are all too comfortable writing off the transgressions of young boys as youthful irresponsibility, all the while prejudicing and ignoring the impacts it has on the healthy development of young girls. With very little as guidance, kids often fall to what they expect typical teenage behaviors to be: drugs, alcohol, and sex, often without proper education or a discussion. And what is missing in these youth sexual relations is that conversation of respect, consent, and the consequences of sex beyond unwanted pregnancy and STDs. Education on queer and trans relationships are equally as disappointing, with 49% trans and 33% lesbian high school students reporting sexual harassment in an article published just last year. All people should know that consent is not just a box to be checked off, but rather an ongoing conversation. It requires adequate education and constant attention. We simply can't expect people to act on what they have not been taught. Boys will only be who they're taught to be. Following conversation with peers, I came to the unsettling conclusion that almost every girl knew someone who had been sexually harassed or abused, but no boy was able to name a harasser. This is not the result of brotherhood and loyalty, but rather a predated sense of self-delusion and entitlement. Even the not all men rhetoric is an effort to silence women, as it then perpetuates the men as the true victims, while reducing women's experiences to overreactions or misandry. The phrase "boys will be boys" dates back to the 16th century with the historical idiom of children, as in boys will be children, and therefore do childish things. And while children do in fact do childish things, the lighthearted saying has morphed into a sinister string of words used to excuse inappropriate behaviors, as shown by recent news events nearby and around the world. A young man's harassment of a girl is seen as a phase, or worse, collateral damage on their way to becoming a good guy. What about girls who'll be girls? When is our playtime? There are so many girls exposed to so much toxicity at such a young age, so many girls deprived of an innocent childhood, and so many girls facing fear and ostracization just for telling their truth or recounting their story. I know I looked at the world differently from that day at the market on, from when I had to comfort a friend following a rape attempt. Too much of my life has been spent in preparation to protect myself from some men, keys between my fingers, pepper spray, and more. And while certainly, as stated before, not all men are a threat, enough are, and even more are silently complacent and willingly complicit. There are simply no excuses anymore, because we've heard them all, even as young as we are. She was drunk, her dress was short, she shouldn't have been left alone at that party. Well, I've been drunk, and I've worn a short skirt, and I've been at a party surrounded by boys. And what enabled that abuse was not me, nor the presence of these aforementioned excuses, but rather the presence of an abuser. We can no longer keep pretending these experiences don't exist while they stay ingrained into the daily lives of millions and millions of women. And we can no longer keep dismissing conversations like such into mere social justice debates capable of being addressed at a better time. Whether we admit it or not, women worldwide are hurting, and silence always favors the abusers. You may argue that we are fairly fortunate here in Canada and that it could be worse, but it can always be worse. And just because the constant normalization of our everyday lives being shaped by misogyny isn't at the extremes it's capable of, doesn't mean it's not a valid problem. Because somewhere in the world, there is always a girl who's less safe. She's less sober with less people in a worse part of town. And none of us are safe until she is safe. We must all speak up in the face of discomfort and in the face of dismissal, for there will be dismissal, and we must all fight to make the world a safer place for all women, whether it be young girls or mature women, and eradicate all harassment that is never a compliment. For a compliment should not leave behind tears. With every time a stranger comments on my still growing body, and with every unsolicited phallic image sent to my social media inboxes, and with every time I think back to that innocent Bangladeshi girl in the markets, the fire within me is only fueled more. For it is us youth that are the future, paving the way for our children. Are they going to continue to live in a world where sunset invites danger, trapped in a constant cycle of vigilance? Or are we going to accept responsibility and take charge of our words, of our actions, and of our culture? So call out your friends when they make rape jokes. Look out for your intoxicated peers or even strangers. And stop teaching little girls that boys pulling their hair means that they like them. Speak up for your women, for your mothers, for your friends, and for your sisters. Speak up for women. I want to help victims of domestic abuse, struggling minorities, sex workers, and the 12 million children who become brides every year. But most importantly, I want to help my peers who feel like they can no longer rely on anyone but themselves to show up for each other. So do exactly that. Show up, start talking, change the world. And while certainly those goals seem optimistic to say the least, by the time I leave this earth, I want to have made the world a safer place for women, even if it's just one woman, and even if that woman's only me. Thank you.